Spread the fire. Welcome back to SMWX in 2020, and we are doing it bigger than ever. Today, I'm extremely excited to be joined by Datu Sipho Pityana, who is a veteran of the struggle, who has led in business. He's been a political activist in the state itself, is president of BUSA, Business Unity South Africa, ahead of the Business Economic Indaba 2020. Tata, it's such a privilege and an honor to be able to speak to you. Thanks for joining SMWX.
Thank you very much, Sizwe. It's a great pleasure and a privilege to chat to you.
So in 2016, at the funeral of former Minister Reverend Stofile, you stood up and gave a speech that sent shockwaves across the political landscape. And you really took it to the ANC and said, and the country at large, and said, you know, we're in a crisis here and something needs to be done. And I remember watching that speech online, and Twitter went crazy, and it was quite a foundational moment.
Yeah. And
here we are over 3 years later. Where do you think we stand after the speech you gave? Inkomo zibuyile, or are we still in a state of crisis?
Well, curiously, I think we've made incredibly good progress in terms of public recognition of the depth of that attempt to steal our sovereignty. The political rhetoric has changed from justifying it to one that seeks to distance it. The exposure of it has been phenomenal through the commissions that have been established. But there is an undercurrent that suggests that the pushback from the gains that we've made is very, very strong. And that's more manifest, if you like, in contestation around the state and ownership of the state and control of the state, and also in terms of economic policy and the direction of how the restructuring of the economy is done and how the levers of the economy are controlled and movement of people to key and critical positions, how that happens. And of course, that's very problematic because, as you know, the state is a big factor in the South African economy. Even though it owns up to about 30-35% of South Africa's fixed assets, its multiplier presence in the economy is much louder and bigger than that, because it is also a regulator in many of the sectors where it actually has operations. So it becomes a player and a referee at the same time.
Sure.
And all of these things result in a situation where a state that is competent, enabling growth of the economy, a state that is not competent, a state that continues to be corrupt, a state that continues to be inefficient and has people that are not competent for the roles that they fulfill, impacting across the economy negatively. And that's a drawback for what we're trying to do. I mean, our ambition as a country of a constitutional dispensation where we put the poor and the marginalized first is enabled by a capable and efficient state. Remember that the theory of the revolution, by the way, starts from a principle of seizure of the state, because the state then is envisaged as that institution and instrument that mediates in the interest of the poor. But the state has been so hollowed and weakened that it now is acting and behaving against the interests of the poor. So part of confronting some of these things is about unleashing the potential that we have to improve the lot of the poor.
And I know that's a focus of the Indaba that's coming up, and I do want to get to that. But I also just wanted to ask you a personal question before that, related to that speech, but also the role that you've taken up in being a vocal public critic of power, of government, sometimes of the ANC, your own home for many decades. What was that like, particularly after the speech? I also have some personal experience, family experience, when you go against the ANC or you're critical of a family, that can be really hard, it can be really isolating. And we don't see what it's like for people who do that. And I think we increasingly need more people to be vocal.
Yeah.
Just take us into what that period was like in 2016 after your speech, and also what it's been like now as you become, again, more critical about the urgency that we need to solve these crises in the state.
Well, I guess it's about choices. If you take on your family and speak out about misdeeds, if you stand up and say that my father is abusive of my mother, everybody would prefer that you raise that in the closed closet of the home. But I think that your credibility and standing is enhanced by being open about what you believe in. Unfortunately, I tend to be a lot more of a non-conformist, and I've been throughout, and I believe that part of the fight to free a country must be about your own freedom. You can't be an effective freedom fighter if you are a prisoner of false ideology and false values, if you like. So it has been a difficult journey. People wondering whether you still are loyal to the organization and loyal to what the organization is about, and being questioned about whether you are seeking to form an opposition a party, etc., etc. But the important thing for me is that is the positive experiences that have come from that, and that South Africans need to confront. Essentially, our political system, though good, has a lot of inadequacies, and its inadequacies manifest in the worst form in how the concept of people's power has been betrayed. Free South Africans should not negotiate their freedom. They should insist that political parties are their agents to pursue their ambitions to be a free people. And that freedom must manifest in the change in their living conditions. To constantly endorse a political party, that political party or parties that show themselves to stand ready to trade your aspirations in negotiations with others and do deals, or trade positions with people that are strong within the parties, even though they don't represent the aspirations of people that voted for them, is treacherous in my view. What that means is that we have to look at our electoral reform urgently, because it has created this system that makes people so powerless and makes political parties too powerful. So we now have all power to political parties and zilch power to the people. So unless you can be in a political party and occupy a leading position in a political party, you'll never be able to seize power and drive an agenda for change. That's why you now have political leadership in the country that is led by retirees, old people with old ideas, because established anchored political parties is what drives change. To get young people out there to mobilize and bring about imaginary new society is unthinkable, because they have to establish a big political party, mobilize resources, etc., etc. The other aspect, which is a major drawback for this country in the electoral system, is that it makes the country actually vulnerable to state capture. Because all you need to do is to steal a party, and through stealing a party, you steal the state. And that's what happened with state capture. And I'm not sure that has come across as clearly as all that, because the forces of state capture, by the way, didn't just seek to steal the ANC, the DA was also a target of that, as are other political parties. So if you want to take over the country, you just have to steal a political party.
And it seems to be quite cheap as well.
Absolutely, it's very cheap to do that. And the benefits for you would be greater, and the consequences for the masses would be disastrous. So today we know that, because the condition of South Africa's economy and the social impact arising from it is as devastating as it is, because the legacy of state capture in policy, in the conduct of the state, etc., is still with us in many ways.
Well, in lieu of that, we've got this Business Economic Indaba coming up. It will actually be held on the day that this video is released. And take us through what the idea behind this Indaba is, why it's being called, and the thinking behind hosting an event where government, business can come together to try and think through some of these important and urgent crises.
Well, remember that this is the second Business Economic Indaba that we are having. We had one last year. Business Unity South Africa is a confederation of various business organizations. We have business formations from various sectors of the economy, whether it's mining or chemicals or manufacturing. We have professional associations that are part of this. We also have chambers of commerce from different regions, etc. So these will be there representing the various companies. They'll bring to bear the experiences that they have of how the economy is underperforming, why it is underperforming, and what needs to be done to fix it. So it basically is a festival of ideas. It's an opportunity for all these views and ideas that we are sharing with government to bring them to the fore and have them shared in an open space. We don't want business to be second guessed. For instance, there's a big narrative which in some ways is misplaced. That business is about a big drive for privatization of state-owned entities.
Sure.
There is no organization in business that I'm aware of that is driving that agenda. But there is a push for business to have options. So if you have a monopoly electricity generator and you're dependent on it for the survival of your business, you worry when that is in crisis. So it obviously says, let us diversify generation of electricity in the same way that with SAA in crisis, as patriots of South Africa, we are concerned about that because this is a flagship business for South Africa, albeit owned by the state. But we continue to do our business because we can fly on other airlines. If Telkom is in trouble, we continue to be able to communicate. It says something that Eskom is in trouble and we're now all in a panic. Why is that? It is because it is such a big monopoly in terms of electricity generation. Nobody does that in the world anymore. So if you want, as a state, to own and be the sole owner of certain assets, fine. You want to run them incompetently, it's bad for the taxpayers, it's bad for the country, but business wants to be able to continue with our lives even if you do that. Would rather you didn't, but would want to be able to have options to do that. So there's no agenda for privatization. So it's those kinds of conversations that we want to make sure that they're out there in the open and people understand what business is about. The other is that business has embraced and drives the agenda for inclusive growth. We're no longer in a space where business is just about profits. We are corporate citizens, and we are aware that to the extent that we have large numbers of our people marginalized, poor, and destitute, this is something that we can't live with as society. So we have to talk to government and reflect on what is it that we do to resolve that situation. Where government provides social security, we need to be looking at how we get those productively engaged, create employment opportunities, training, enable those that are trying to enter business, starting their own businesses, to succeed in doing so, and how we create those partnerships. So the idea of exclusivity as the central pillar of successful enterprises in the economy has to be put paid. It's those kinds of conversations. What does it mean to be a meaningful corporate citizen? So those are conversations that will be cross-cutting. So it's good that the Minister, for instance, of small business will be there. If we say to government that government please pay on time, the small players who are providing goods and services, what is the responsibility of big corporates? Shouldn't we be affording them? What does Black economic empowerment mean? Fortunately, Black Business Council, who are not our member, have accepted our invitation, and they will be there. There'll be conversations about what does it mean for all of us to push the agenda for Black economic empowerment as part of dealing with the legacy of apartheid, both in terms of supporting Black businesses, but also partnering with emerging Black businesses, and also creating opportunities for Black professionals to make it through to provide goods and services, etc. Not just to government, but also to South African corporates. So it's an opportunity to have those sort of cross-cutting conversations across the board. And importantly, although we have discussions with government on a range of things throughout the year, the president will tell you, we meet with him once a month, every Monday, together with trade unions, etc. There is a view that some of the things that we raise are not being followed through, and that there is no sense of urgency in driving them to make sure that we secure the success of the South African economy and the positioning of the country. So that's what that is about. It takes place just before the State of the Nation address, and it takes place just before the budget speech, both of which take place in February. Our hope is that nobody will say that as corporate citizens, we have not put forward views that will help position the country better. Government may proceed to ignore what we think is in the best interest of the country, but they definitely will not be in a position to say that they didn't know.
President Ramaphosa's agenda seems to have centered around many of these kinds of engagements, even though he hasn't spearheaded this one. There's been a lot of talking, there's been a lot of engagement and public engagement. Why do you think this will be different? What do you think will come out of this that hasn't come out of previous engagements with the state? And can we expect government to actually take this seriously? Because it seems to me as though sometimes they show up at these events and take that as progress, whereas we're not seeing the tangible progress on the ground from this administration. Yeah.
That's a big frustration from many, and in the meetings that we have with the president, monthly meetings that we've been having with him since about July, August or so last year, these are the things that we sought to talk about. But it's interesting that we began to see a movement on some of the areas. For instance, we talked about spectrum. Right. At the last meeting that we had of the Economic Indaba, and we were presented with a schedule on the rollout of spectrum. We talked about visa regulations. We were presented with a detailed program of how the visa regulation to enable tourists coming in, and the dropping of this abridged certificate for kids, which was causing lots of problems. We have not made good progress with regard to issue of enabling movement of skills, scarce skills into the country, but it's on the agenda. We've made progress in regard to water licensing, and we made the point that just by relaxing those, you create opportunities for a number of thousands of jobs. But we've not made progress in respect of issues around structural economic reforms that need to enable growth of the economy, which is what will drive the agenda for sustainable creation of jobs and sustainable attraction of investments in the economy. That's where the biggest frustration is. We've not made progress with regard to mapping out an agenda for restructuring of state-owned entities. We actually think that some of the state-owned entities give us a leverage to enable attraction of investments in terms of capital, but also in terms of new technologies and access to markets beyond South Africa for some of those state-owned enterprises. That's how many state-owned enterprises in various parts of the world evolved. They start by servicing a country and they end up becoming global players. So there's no reason why South African state-owned entities can't grow beyond that. How do they become agents of development in South Africa, using the benefits that they get from their international exposure and using that capital to leverage opportunities elsewhere in here. So a conversation around restructuring of state-owned entities is more than just about whether you privatize or you don't, you sell them or you don't, or you put them on business rescue or you don't. It's about
what's the actual role?
How we use this to leverage and reposition the economy. And if we get this right, we can actually impact this economy in a fantastic way. So we've not made progress there. The president has been talking about setting up this council, which has not happened. It was part of his State of the Nation address last year, and it hasn't happened. So we are talking about a capable state, but in fact, as many people do, that this idea of a capable state and ending corruption in the state is part of the National Development Plan, as recommended by the National Planning Commission, which was chaired by the president. We should be getting a statement of progress on how far are we in implementing the strengthening of the capacity of the state. So it's those things that are a source of frustration. So we think that we'll be remiss as a country, as business, as trade unions, and as civil society, if we didn't demand that government must give actual detailed account of this is what we promised. We promised that we'll do the enabling of a capable state. These are the programs that we sort of introduced to do that. This is how far we've gone. This is the impact that we've made. Not another promise that will deliver a capable state. This is what we set about to do on corruption. Not another promise of we are looking at this, because it just creates a credibility gap.
Absolutely. And even sometimes just the acceptance that there has been failure is better than just replacing a promise without even accounting for the failure.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Just finally, we'll also be at the Indaba to cover what happens there and sharing it with you guys, so make sure you look out for that content as well. But it does feel to me as though there was a period after President Ramaphosa came into office in which many people regained their hope, and in some ways the pressure on the ANC dissipated to some extent. How much longer do you think President Ramaphosa has to start convincing people that something is happening before the tide actually turns against him as well?
Well, my sense is that there's a growing impatience generally in society, and a dismissive attitude to promises that are being made. And that's inevitable because, you know, the situation is absolutely desperate. If you look at what is happening in local government, even though the Auditor General has reports that attest to what are the things that are making local government so dysfunctional, there is no sign that there is an improvement in local government. So in many ways, if you read what is coming through, people are talking about President Ramaphosa as somebody who has been president for 2 years. Somebody who's been the leader of government business for 5 years. Somebody who's been involved in the National Planning Commission and delivered a diagnostic report that actually speaks to why is our economy underperforming, why are the institutions of the state not doing well, where are we on skills and education, why is that not working, etc., etc. So the expectation is that this is somebody who is familiar with where the challenges are and therefore would hit the ground running. 2 years on, there's a sense that there isn't sufficient movement on key and critical issues. And you will no doubt know that in conversations that we have with government, these are the things that we talk about. But, you know, this is a country that has had its winning ways. Many will forget that we, once upon a time, had growth levels at 5.5%. We trebled the size of the economy after 1994. We saw massive growth of the black middle class in the most unprecedented way since, and we had high levels of attraction of foreign direct investments, and the integration of South Africa in the world economy was phenomenal. So we were a successful project coming from a very difficult place, so that when we took over in South Africa in 1994, debt levels were very high. They are higher today than they were then, but it's possible to actually go back to our winning ways. So that's why this Economic Indaba is taking place, is to remind South Africans that we have what it takes to actually fix this country and make a success of it. And we shouldn't allow anybody to let us down.
Well, Dada, thanks so much for your contributions. Thanks for joining us on SMWX, and we look forward to seeing you at the Business Economic Indaba 2020.
Sizwe, thank you very much to you and your listeners and your viewers. Thank you.
Ayeye. Thanks for watching the content. Like, share, and subscribe on all platforms. smwx.co.za to join the WhatsApp channel. And let's build a new conversation for a new generation. Ayeye.